Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode we find out what our animal friends get up to when we're not around in The Secret Life of Pets. Pampered Russell Terrier Max, voiced by Louis C.K., lives a comfortable existence with dog lover Katie, voiced by Ellie Kemper, but his world is shattered when she brings home Newfoundland Duke, voiced by Eric Stonestreet. The two dogs become instant rivals, but their fighting leaves them stranded on the streets of New York, where they soon encounter animal control and an underground resistance of flushed pets, led by Kevin Hart's rabbit Snowball. Meanwhile, Pomeranian Gidget, voiced by Jenny Slate, leads the apartment's pets on a rescue mission to find Max and Duke and get them home safely before Katie comes back. 2016 has proved itself to be a fairly good year for family films, especially if they come from the Disney stable, who have managed to have not one, not two, but three bona fide hits this year, including Zootopia, aka Zootropolis as it was known in the UK, the Jungle Book remake, and Finding Dory, which hasn't opened in the UK yet, but I've heard fairly good things about. And the reason those movies are so successful is they really cater to a family audience. Yeah, they entertain the younger portion of the market, but there's also the fact that they entertain older audiences as well, because they contain a lot more subtleties and nuances and complexities than you might expect from a film of that ilk. And this especially goes for something like Zootopia, which I was very impressed with, because it managed to tackle the concept of prejudice and racism really head on, but still make it accessible to that younger audience. And it really shows what you can do with something like a talking animal movie, which can sometimes be very, very, unambitious. It can be really kind of lazy and pandering, and Zootopia very much felt like it had built an entire world for itself, and that was kind of remarkable. And that's really unfortunate for The Secret Life of Pets. And if you're wondering why I keep talking about Disney at the start of this film that isn't a Disney movie, it's because coming out just a couple of months after Zootopia really kind of shows up The Secret Life of Pets, which has been very heavily advertised. It has been trailed for, I think, roughly around a year straight now. It does have a fairly cute idea about it, and you're probably familiar with it because you've no doubt seen the trailer in front of another film. The teaser trailer in particular is pretty much the opening sequence of this film, and you can understand why they put that entire section out there. It's because it very much gives you an idea of what the film is like, and it's the most inspired portion of the film, I think. It's kind of a clever idea of how we like to see our pets almost as little mini humans. We like to see them do these little home comfort human things. That's a very funny idea in the short term. Where The Secret Life of Pets falls down for me is that really it tries to have a story, and that story is Toy Story. This favourite is usurped by a newcomer and they become instant rivals. They bicker and fight, eventually circumstances come along and they end up getting separated from their owner, Katie in this, Andy in Toy Story, and they have to make their way back. That's basically the plot of both of these two movies. But it's like Toy Story if both characters were Woody. See, I've always thought that Louis C.K. was a bit of a weird choice for this, because he's not exactly known as being a family-friendly performer with his show Louis, and his humour tends to run quite dark, and yes, it's observational, much like this film, but his presence here, it doesn't improve the movie. He's voicing this dog Max, whose entire world revolves around his owner. He just sits around all day waiting for Katie to come back. He's a bit of a blank slate as a character, and CK's voice acting is as generic as it comes. This is nothing against CK, I think he can be quite funny, it's just he doesn't really work for this movie. Whereas Eric Stonestreet, who I'm not very familiar with actually, because Modern Family is not very well known in the UK as it is in the US, he's very much playing Duke in the sort of Dom DeLuise mould. There's a little bit more warmth to that performance that you can understand why Stonestreet was cast in it. But some of the issues with The Secret Life of Pets really lies on a plot level, because the idea of Toy Story, that toys came to life when their owners were not around, was a really unique one. It wasn't something that you'd seen before at that particular time. If you swapped out toys with dogs, suddenly that becomes a lot less interesting in some ways, because we've seen this kind of movie before. We have seen loads of talking animal movies before, and we've seen loads of talking animal movies that lead to them getting lost in the city in some way. It's hard not to watch some parts of The Secret Life of Pets and not find yourself mentally thinking of other movies in this particular genre. Things like Oliver and Company, for example, or Homeward Bound, things like that. Its arcs and progression is very much by the numbers. They start off as enemies, they end up having to work together to get out of their predicament, to get back to their owner, and they start to find some common ground and they start to become friends. It's not exactly the most unpredictable movie, and the film just kind of just goes along those rigid plot beats. And when it comes to the voice cast, they've got this fantastic lineup of actors and comedians, but the issue is that they're kind of underutilised because the characters they're voicing are very much one-note, one-joke characters. There are exceptions, however. Kevin Hart especially. He voices the psychotic rabbit Snowball, and you can clearly tell right from the outset that Snowball was intended to be the breakout of this movie. He's given all the scene-stealing big moments, and his character is quite amusing. It very much suits Hart's manic, high-energy style. However, I was bothered by the fact that I did think that they were going to make him the main antagonist of the movie, and it seems like he was going to be for a good amount of time, and then the movie isn't really sure about that decision. It feels like it chickens out of making that character the villain of the piece, and it really undercuts what Hart is trying to do, because he's really having fun with the sort of crazy, maniacal character that he's been given. And the same could be said for Albert Brooks. Albert Brooks gave me the most laughs in this movie. He voices a hawk, and his character has a killer introduction, no pun intended. He's set up that he's blindfolded and he's surrounded by bones. It's a really sinister intro to this character, and again, when you first see that character, you think, okay, that's going to be the antagonist of the movie right there. But he's not. His actual character is that, yes, he's a hawk and he's a little bit murderous, but he does actually want to be a friendly guy. He just wants someone to hang out with him while he kills other animals. As the movie progresses, the movie forgets that particular element of the character. It just sort of lets it fall by the wayside, which was really disappointing, because it's a character that had so much potential, and then he just ends up being a background player. The other actor that really came out of this quite well is Dana Carvey, in probably one of the few major roles that I can think of in recent memory. He voices Pops, an elderly dog that assists them on their quest, and he's so old that his brow has fallen over his eyes. There's a cute little visual gag where they keep lifting his brow back up so that he can see. Carvey is enjoying himself as he lends out lines like, "I'm so old, every breath is an adventure," and basically playing jokes of, oh, he's just about to die. But again, you can see what I'm saying there. It's a character that has that one note, and they keep hitting that one note, and you could say that about the entire cast of characters. This is most egregious for Jenny Slate, who I liked in Zootopia, but here I found her really irritating, but that's not really the fault of her so much as the character and the way it's been written, because the character that she's been handed is basically an obsessed crush. All the dog is basically a variation of, where is Max? Where is Max? Where is Max? To an almost psychotic degree in some scenes, and it gets very old very quickly. It's clear though that the main focus of the movie is slapstick. It's very much catering to that younger end of the audience that wants to see slapstick. And director Chris Renard, who has helmed much of Illumination's work, you can tell that his signature style is all over this movie. He gives this very high energy quality almost like an action movie in some ways, because we're going from one set piece to another, and at its least inspired moments, The Secret Life of Pets does feel like we're jumping from one chase sequence to another. They have to run away from animal control, now we have to run away from the flush pet, now we have to run away from animal control again, and so on and so forth. But occasionally, you'll get a moment of pure brilliance snuck in there. Easily the highlight of the film comes 2/3 of the way through in a dream sequence where Max and Duke start fantasizing about a land of sausages, and this sequence comes completely out of nowhere. It is such a surreal, weird, non sequitur musical interlude that you suddenly think, hang on a minute, has Sausage Party arrived several months early with a PG rating? Because this is exactly what it feels like. It feels like an interruption from a much stranger, more ambitious film than this one. It's an inspired, brilliant moment in a movie that's otherwise fairly mediocre, and it was probably the biggest laughs in the film for me because it's just so odd. Illumination's work has always been very strong when it comes to its animation, and this is no exception. And this is especially good in 3D. I saw it in its 3D presentation, and there are a lot of gags here that really play towards that format. There's a joke involving snakes coming out of the camera, and the way that a crocodile character has been designed with this very long but uneven snout. He comes out of the screen at several points, and it really plays towards that format. They do a really good job, the animators, of making New York feel like a character in this movie. And you can really feel that in the opening shot where they swoop through with a bird's eye view of the city. And the way that it was going through, it actually gave me vertigo in 3D, which is a very weird sensation to experience in a cinema. I've never had that before. So, if you want to see this movie in 3D, I would advise doing that. I think it plays best in that format. And while I was watching this, it was very hard to shake the feeling that this really, really wanted to be a Pixar movie. And I'm not just saying that because this blatantly cribbed from Toy Story. It's because later on, they try to go for an emotional element to the story that really doesn't work. Because first of all, the second that they introduce this particular element, you know exactly where it's going, and you've guessed it long before it arrives. And secondly, the characters in this movie are so thinly sketched that you can't resonate with them. The characters in Pixar films, you connect with them, you like them, you enjoy spending time with them, so it really feels like a gut punch when those moments happen. You don't get any of that with a character in this movie. And too much of The Secret Life of Pets, which is this very highly promoted, very much commercially tied in movie, it feels like a product selling you a concept that isn't fully formed in the execution. And this feeling of it being a product is really not helped during the climax when there is a hijacked bus, and on the back of the bus, I kid you not, there is a poster for Illumination's next film, Sing, on the back of it. I'm sorry guys, that's really cynical, and that really took me out of the movie. That is absolutely shameless. And I know I'm being harsh to a film that's not really that bad, not really that good either. I think my issue is that the idea feels very much overstretched. Even though the movie has a very short running time, it runs at roughly around 85 minutes without the short in front of it, it still feels like this idea can't sustain the entire running time, and towards the end of the film it was running out of steam a lot of the time. The best thing that could have been done with this particular idea is take out the movie in between and leave the pets and their owners segments that bookend this movie and just turn that into a short. That's really what this is. It feels like a short unnecessarily expanded to feature length. On one final note, I'll review the short that's attached to the beginning of this movie called Mower Minions, which is exactly what you might expect. It's the minions answering a call for gardening, and this has clearly been bolted on because the movie came in under time. It bumps up the movie to exactly 90 minutes in total. If your tolerance for the minions, like mine, is very low. It's gonna test your patience, because this is very much aimed at children in the audience who still find the minions hysterical. So we get all the minion gags that you might expect. So we get bare bottom minions and explosions, and one of the minions steps in dog poo, which ends up becoming a running gag throughout this thing. If you're not 5, I think you'll find yourself being very much exhausted by the short even before the film begins. Otherwise, it's fairly harmless, like the film itself. The Secret Life of Pets is a very average animated movie, and coming just a few months after Zootopia, its emptiness is all too apparent, proving to be a weak retread of Toy Story and numerous other Lost in the City animal-themed films. There's a fantastic voice cast assembled, but aside from Hart, Carvey and Brooks, there's not much need for them in one-note characters, especially when the film is so heavy on Illumination's signature brand of slapstick chaos, which does occasionally hit moments of invention. It's clear they're trying to ape Pixar here, but the attempts at emotion are so unearned when it feels so much like a product. Coming up soon, the cast of Ice Age are on a collision course, Patsy and Edna are back as Absolutely Fabulous gets his own movie, and I take a look at the controversial new Ghostbusters. But until then, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out. Yes! Alright, don't kick.